When the state announced that 40 orphaned children would be separated forever, one poor widow made an impossible promise. She had no savings, no family, and barely enough food for herself. Everyone laughed at her decision. Some called her foolish, others called her desperate. But 20 years later, the very children everyone had given up on would return together and leave an entire town speechless. Sarah Mitchell had never imagined that a simple act of kindness would completely change the course of her life. At 46, she lived alone in a weathered farmhouse on the outskirts of a quiet town in Tennessee. The white paint had long faded, the wooden porch creaked beneath every step, and the roof leaked whenever heavy rain rolled through the valley. It wasn't much, but it was home. 12 years earlier, she had lost her husband, Daniel, in a highway accident on his way home from work. They had dreamed of filling that little house with children, but fate had written a different ending. After Daniel's death, Sarah buried herself in work instead of sorrow. She spent her mornings serving breakfast at a local diner and her evenings cleaning offices in town. The pay barely covered the bills, yet she always managed to set aside a little money to help others. Her neighbors often wondered why a woman who had so little insisted on giving so much. Sarah always smiled and answered with the same words, "Kindness doesn't wait until you're rich." Every Friday afternoon, before driving home from work, Sarah stopped at the local grocery store. She filled 2 reusable bags with canned vegetables, cereal, peanut butter, bread, milk, and fresh fruit whenever she could afford it. Then she drove to Haven Hills Children's Home, a small privately funded orphanage that had cared for abandoned and orphaned children for decades. She wasn't a volunteer on paper, nor was she related to any of the children. She simply showed up week after week because she believed every child deserved to know someone cared enough to remember them. The children adored her. They called her Miss Sarah, and every visit ended the same way. Tiny footsteps raced down the hallway as children fought to hug her first before she left. Sarah laughed every time, promising she'd return the following Friday. To the staff, she wasn't just another donor, she was family. One rainy Tuesday evening, as Sarah finished wiping down tables at the diner, her phone vibrated in her apron pocket. The caller ID read, "Martha Collins." Martha had managed Haven Hills for more than 20 years and rarely called unless something was wrong. Sarah answered immediately. Before she could say hello, she heard Martha quietly crying, "Sarah, can you come over, please?" Sarah's heart sank. "What's happened?" There was a long pause before Martha whispered, "We're closing." For a moment, Sarah thought she had misunderstood. "Closing? What do you mean?" "The foundation that funded us lost everything after Mr. Harrison passed away. We tried finding new sponsors, but no one stepped forward. We can't pay the staff anymore. The state is taking over next month." Sarah slowly sat down on a chair inside the empty diner. "And the children?" "They'll all be transferred." Together, another painful silence filled the line. "No," Sarah closed her eyes, "the siblings will be separated." She couldn't find words after that. The next morning, she drove straight to Haven Hills. The cheerful building she had visited for years felt strangely different. The playground was empty. The swings moved gently in the wind, though no children were laughing. Inside, the atmosphere was painfully quiet. Cardboard boxes lined the hallway, each one labeled with a child's name. Everything a child owned had been reduced to a single box. Sarah stepped into the dining hall where social workers were explaining what would happen over the next few weeks. Every child would be assigned to a different foster family depending on availability. Some would stay in Tennessee. Others would move to neighboring states. Brothers and sisters would likely be separated because very few families were willing or able to take more than one child. Sarah looked around the room and saw fear in every face. 9-year-old Emma held tightly onto her older brother Jake's hand. "They won't split us up, right?" she whispered. Jake tried to smile even though tears filled his eyes. "I'll always find you." Across the room, 6-year-old Noah clung to Martha's sweater. "What if my new family doesn't know I'm scared of thunderstorms?" Nobody answered him. Near the window, 2 sisters sat together hugging a worn teddy bear they had shared since arriving at Haven Hills years earlier. One of them quietly asked a social worker if they could stay together. The woman looked away before softly saying she couldn't promise anything. Sarah had seen children cry before. She had comforted scraped knees and broken toys, but she had never seen children preparing to lose the only family they had left. After the meeting ended, she walked outside with Martha. Rain fell softly across the playground as dozens of children remained gathered beneath the porch roof, holding one another as though letting go meant saying goodbye forever. "I've spent 22 years trying to give these kids stability," Martha said through tears. "Now I'm watching it disappear." Sarah stared at the children. "They've already lost their parents." Martha nodded. "And now they're losing each other." "There isn't another choice," Martha whispered. Sarah wanted to believe that. She really did, but something deep inside refused to accept it. That evening, after finishing her second job, Sarah sat alone at her kitchen table. The house was silent except for the ticking clock hanging above the refrigerator. She couldn't stop thinking about the frightened faces she'd seen that morning. Noah's question echoed inside her mind. What if my new family doesn't know I'm scared of thunderstorms? She imagined children waking up in unfamiliar bedrooms, surrounded by strangers, wondering if they'd ever see their brothers or sisters again. Sleep never came. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, Sarah opened the small wooden box that held Daniel's letters. Whenever life became overwhelming, she found comfort in reading his words. One letter, written only weeks before his accident, caught her attention. "The world changes because ordinary people refuse to walk away when everyone else does." Sarah read the sentence again, then again. As the first light of dawn crept through her kitchen window, she folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the box. For the first time since Martha's phone call, the fear inside her was replaced by something stronger. A decision. By sunrise, Sarah Mitchell knew exactly what she was going to do, even if the entire town believed she had lost her mind. As soon as the county offices opened that morning, Sarah drove into town with nothing more than Daniel's letter folded inside her purse and a determination she could not explain. The receptionist smiled politely as she checked Sarah in, assuming she had come to ask about volunteering or making a donation. Instead, when Sarah was invited into the conference room, she looked directly at the county child welfare officials and quietly said, "I'm here because I don't want those 40 children separated. I want to keep them together." The room fell silent. One official leaned back in his chair, believing he had misunderstood. "Mrs. Mitchell, are you saying you'd like to foster 1 or 2 children?" Sarah shook her head. "No, all of them." The officials exchanged confused glances before explaining why it simply wasn't possible. No private citizen could suddenly become the guardian of 40 children. There were licensing laws, safety inspections, medical requirements, educational regulations, staffing rules, and enormous financial responsibilities. One man even pulled out a calculator, estimating that the yearly cost of feeding, clothing, educating, and caring for 40 children would reach hundreds of thousands of dollars. Sarah listened without interrupting. When they finished, she asked only one question: "If I can meet every legal requirement, will you allow them to stay together?" The officials hesitated. Finally, the director answered, "If every requirement is met and the children are properly cared for, we won't stand in your way." It wasn't encouragement, but it wasn't a refusal either. Sarah walked out of the building with more obstacles than answers, yet for the first time, hope felt stronger than fear. Within days, the entire town was talking about her decision. People laughed openly inside grocery stores. Customers at the diner whispered as Sarah served their coffee. Some called her brave, most called her foolish. "You can't save 40 children," one customer said. "You'll ruin your own life." Sarah simply smiled and replied, "Maybe changing one life always looks impossible until someone actually does it." She knew she couldn't do it alone. She sold nearly everything she owned except Daniel's letters and a few treasured photographs. The small amount of money she received barely made a difference, but it was enough to prove her commitment. Then she visited every church, community center, business owner, and charity organization within driving distance. Some politely turned her away, others listened without offering help. But a few people believed in her. A retired contractor volunteered to renovate an abandoned church building that had been sitting empty for years. Local electricians repaired the wiring without charging labor. Plumbers replaced broken pipes. A grocery store owner promised weekly food donations. Teachers offered free tutoring after school. A pediatrician agreed to examine every child without billing for routine visits. Little by little, strangers who had never met the children began becoming part of their future. Months of inspections followed: fire safety, health regulations, sleeping arrangements, emergency planning, educational standards. Every time Sarah completed one requirement, another appeared. She worked through exhaustion, surviving on coffee and 4 hours of sleep each night. There were moments she cried alone inside her truck, wondering whether everyone else had been right. But every time doubt appeared, she remembered 40 frightened faces sitting inside Haven Hills with cardboard boxes at their feet. Eventually, the final inspection day arrived. The state approved the residence as a licensed group home. For the first time since Haven Hills announced its closure, the children wouldn't have to say goodbye to one another. The day they arrived was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. The youngest children ran through the halls laughing, amazed they were still together. Older siblings carried boxes into bedrooms. Some children cried with relief, others simply stood quietly, afraid happiness might disappear if they believed in it too quickly. That first evening, Sarah prepared the largest meal she had ever cooked. Everyone squeezed around long wooden tables built by volunteers. Before anyone touched the food, Sarah looked around the room. "You've all lost people you loved," she said softly. "I can't replace them, I never will, but as long as I'm breathing, none of you will ever have to face life alone again." The room became completely silent. Then little Noah stood up, walked around the table, and hugged her, one by one. 39 more children followed. Life with 40 children quickly became both beautiful and exhausting. Every morning began before sunrise: breakfast for 40, lunches packed for school, missing shoes, forgotten homework, doctor appointments, parent-teacher meetings, soccer games, birthday celebrations, nightmares, arguments, tears, laughter. The washing machines never stopped. The kitchen never stayed clean, the lights always seemed to be on, yet somehow the old building had become something far more valuable than an orphanage. It had become a home. The years weren't easy, money remained tight. Sarah often skipped meals without telling anyone. When winter heating bills became too expensive, she quietly wore extra sweaters instead of turning up the thermostat. She patched worn-out clothes herself and repaired broken furniture whenever she could. One winter, she became seriously ill with pneumonia but refused to stay in the hospital longer than 2 days because she worried about the children. The older teenagers noticed anyway. Without saying anything, they began waking up earlier each morning. Jake started making breakfast before school. Emma helped the younger children get dressed. Several teenagers found part-time jobs after school and secretly gave every paycheck to Sarah. When she discovered what they had done, tears filled her eyes. "You earned this money," she said. Jake smiled. "So did you." Years quietly passed. The frightened little children grew into confident young adults. One earned a scholarship to medical school. Another became an engineer. Emma became an elementary school teacher because she wanted every child to feel safe. Jake joined the military before later becoming a firefighter. Noah studied architecture, determined to design homes where children would never feel abandoned. Others became nurses, business owners, police officers, counselors, electricians, and community leaders. Although life took them across the country, they never forgot the woman who had refused to let them be separated. Sarah grew older. Her hair slowly turned silver. Walking became more difficult. The once energetic woman who had chased 40 children through hallways now spent quiet afternoons rocking on the same porch where she used to wait for school buses. Sometimes she wondered whether the children still remembered those difficult years. She never asked, she didn't expect anything in return. For her, watching them build happy lives had always been enough. Then, on the morning of her 66th birthday, something unusual happened. A black SUV pulled into her driveway, then another, and another. Within minutes, dozens of vehicles lined the quiet country road. Curious neighbors stepped outside, wondering which celebrity had come to town. Sarah slowly opened her front door. The first person she recognized was Noah, only now he wasn't the frightened 6-year-old who feared thunderstorms. He was a successful architect wearing a tailored suit. Without saying a word, he hugged her tightly. "I'm home, Mom." Mom, it was the first time anyone had ever called her that. Before she could respond, Emma stepped forward carrying flowers. Jake followed in his firefighter uniform. Then came doctor after doctor, teachers, lawyers, soldiers, business owners, nurses, engineers. One after another, all 40 children stood together on the front lawn. Neighbors watched in stunned silence. These were the same children everyone believed would become another forgotten statistic. Instead, they had become living proof that love could change the direction of an entire generation. Jake stepped forward holding a small wooden box. Inside were 40 handwritten letters. "We each wrote one," he said, "because there was never a single day we forgot what you did for us." Sarah opened the first letter with trembling hands. It read, "You gave us something no one else could, each other. Everything I became started the day you refused to let us be separated." By the time she finished reading, tears streamed down her face. Then Noah handed her one final envelope. Inside was the deed to a newly built children's center. Above the entrance, engraved in stone, were the words, "The Sarah Mitchell Family Center." Beneath it was a single sentence she recognized immediately. "The world changes because ordinary people refuse to walk away when everyone else does." It was Daniel's favorite quote. The children had found it inside the old wooden box years earlier. That afternoon, the entire town gathered for the dedication ceremony. The same people who had once laughed at Sarah now stood and applauded with tears in their eyes. Many admitted they had judged her too quickly, some even apologized. Sarah smiled and forgave every one of them because she had never set out to prove anyone wrong. She had simply chosen not to abandon 40 children who needed one person to believe in them. In the end, Sarah didn't become famous because she was wealthy, powerful, or extraordinary. She became unforgettable because she proved that family isn't always created by blood. Sometimes it's created by a promise that refuses to break, and 40 grateful hearts spent the rest of their lives making sure the woman who saved them would never be forgotten.